Welcome to the Participatory Grantmaking Community of Practice. It's so nice to see you all. I'm going to do a quick whiz through, but the first things first, it is our year anniversary. So the community is a year old, which is really exciting and very strange all at the same time. We started this time last year in the first kind of the UK lockdowns. There were 12 of us on a call being like, oh my God, I'm doing Participatory Grantmaking. Are you doing Participatory Grantmaking? Oh, this is exciting. And today I have found out that we are at 301 members, which is quite the growth for a year. So welcome. Thanks for coming back and getting involved. But happy birthday. The approach, so the community of practice, we hold two monthly sessions, but they are the same agenda. So as I just explained, we have one at this time on the first Thursday of every month and one at 8 a.m. to 9:30 UK time, the first Friday of every month. And between the two groups, we tend to have about 80 participants, which is a pretty good show. You can just pick which one suits you. Some of the Europeans, the UK, you can pick which one suits your diaries. Some of you, the others are not a good time. So that's fine. We have 3 rolling sessions. This just gives you a bit of an oversight about what you're coming into. You might decide that you're not interested in some, but really interested in others. So you can pick and choose which you come along to. This session is a deep dive, which is a kind of case study into a particular topic. This session, actually, I've got a slide that says the actual things. Then we do peer support and learning, which is an opportunity for you to kind of meet people, make friends, unpick a particular issue, grapple with a challenge, generally meet other people working in this space, and advocacy sessions, which are looking at strategizing around participatory grantmaking and how we grow this practice across philanthropy more widely. Today's agenda, we are I'm very excited. I think you guys should be excited too, to be joined by Josh Lerner from People Powered and Rose Longhurst, who wears numerous hats, but has been involved in Fund Action, Edge Fund, and OSF. They'll be joining us today to chat about participatory budgeting and participatory grantmaking, and how they are similar, different, what we can learn from the two different practices. We're going to kick off with a bit of an icebreaker, which I'll introduce in a moment. Then Josh and Rose will give a bit of an overview. We'll have a bit of clarifying questions, but we're going to try and keep that to clarifying questions. And then we'll go, because there's a longer period during the session for getting more into the detail. And then we'll be looking at applying participatory budgeting and the learning and the kind of like overlapping aspects to participatory grantmaking. And then we'll have a discussion, and we'll do that in breakout rooms so you can all talk and it's not just one or two of you talking into the big group. Coming up, so March, this is now, is the deep dive on participatory budgeting. The session in April, which I actually probably should talk to you all about, is advocacy, but the Friday session falls on a bank holiday in the UK, and I imagine a bank holiday for lots of people as it's Good Friday. I'll also chat to the Friday club about whether they want to change or cancel that, but I just want to make people aware that we haven't decided what we're doing that, and if you turn up and nobody's there, we'll let you know whether we're cancelling or changing. May is a peer support and learning. June is a deeper dive, and we haven't confirmed what that is yet. So if there is a topic or an issue that you particularly want to get involved in or stuck in, or that you're interested in, please do let us know, and we can organise that deeper dive around those topics. And then we go back, so July is an advocacy and August is a peer support and learning. We also have some bonus sessions coming up. Some of you may know Ben and Meg, Meg's definitely on the call. I can see her smiling at me. I'm not sure. Oh, Ben is also on the call. Hello. These guys are wonderful, and they have written a book around participatory grantmaking and investment called Letting Go. They're going to link to their stuff in the chat, but we're doing a launch event with them on the 11th of March. Which is looking at participation beyond philanthropy. So looking at how we can build participation into investments, which is going to be very exciting. So yeah, that's great. We're doing a session on the 19th of March called When It All Hits the Fan. I threw about a couple of names for this session, but all of them involve some swear words. So I went with When It All Hits the Fan. And it's a session basically to allow people to share when it all goes wrong, what they've learned from that process and what they wouldn't do it again. So we can all, avoid those pitfalls in the future. We'll be joined by the incredible Matt Potts from Camarades, which is an organisation in the UK that some of you might know if you are that way inclined. But he does a lot of work around being a bit shit sometimes. So we'll be joined by him and his excellent, very comedic ways. There are 2 sessions in the pipeline that we don't have dates for, but should be very exciting. One on disability rights and how we can achieve that through participatory grantmaking, and one around storytelling and narratives and learning from Indigenous communities about how we do those things. So very exciting, brilliant. As you all know, or maybe you don't, but feedback is the breakfast of champions. We are always looking to improve the way that the community works for you and for others. I'm going to post this link in the chat and I'll put it in the end as well. But anything that you think that was a bit shit, that could have been better, this is how I'd like to work next time, please do let us know, because it's really, really helpful. So that is my whistle top intro to the community of practice. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms now, and I'm going to ask you, you'll have 5 minutes or so to do this. And the question is, seeing as it is our birthday and we've had a whole year of existence, your question to chat in the breakout rooms is, what is the biggest thing that you're proud of achieving over the last year? That could be anything from surviving the homeschooling to growing a giant cheese plant, to getting a funding proposal signed off, whatever you fancy. But that is your question for your breakout rooms. So enjoy. Welcome back to the main group. I'm now going to hand over to Josh and Rose. I think they're back to take it away.
Great. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, that's working.
Great. So we're excited to be here with you all. My name is Josh Lerner. I'm in New York, and I direct a nonprofit organization called People Powered. We're a global hub for participatory democracy. Before that, I founded and directed another organization called the Participatory Budgeting Project that supported and supports participatory budgeting, mostly in the US and Canada. And last year, we were talking at some of the PGM sessions and online about participatory budgeting and what lessons that could provide to grant makers. And so that's the idea behind this session, to do a deeper dive to learn from this broader participatory practice. Hopefully it's useful, we'll find out. And Rose Longhurst will be joining and talking more along with me about how to apply this approach to grant making. So again, the agenda, I'll start out by talking about participatory budgeting and situating it in the broader field of participatory democracy to give you some more context for this work. I'll have a short Q&A about participatory budgeting. And I'll start saying PB from now on because it's a lot shorter and easier to say. So I'm not talking about peanut butter, I'm talking about participatory budgeting. So I'll just say PB. And then Rose and I will talk about how to apply PB to participatory grant making, and then we'll have the breakout discussions. So first, stepping back and looking at the broader field, that participatory budgeting is part of what's often known as participatory democracy. The way we understand that at People Powered is a form of democracy that enables community members to make the policy decisions that affect their lives. You probably also heard about deliberative democracy, direct democracy, other kinds of democracy. There's a lot of overlap here, and a lot of the difference is where people put the emphasis. So for deliberative democracy, the emphasis is generally on deliberation, reaching good decisions. For participatory democracy, it's more on participation and power. So that's personally where I situate myself. But regardless, there's a very broad field of this work that predates a lot of participatory grant making and that hopefully can inspire your work. In practice, what does this look like? We'll talk mostly today about participatory budgeting, but there's lots of other models and forms of participatory democracy. Just a few of them here: participatory policymaking, participatory planning. Citizen juries and assemblies have become very popular recently, especially in Europe. Legislative theater, which grew out of the theater of the oppressed approach developed in Brazil, and other processes as well. I want to talk a little bit about my organization, People Powered, partly to introduce myself, and also because it will be relevant for understanding participatory democracy and participatory budgeting. As I mentioned, we're a new organization just launched last year, and we grew out of a kind of introspection or reflection moment in this field of participatory democracy that was sparked originally by the Hewlett Foundation and Omidyar Network, recognizing that even though participatory budgeting had spread around the world, there wasn't a lot of coordination. There were a lot of common problems that kept coming up and that weren't being solved. And so they invested in a co-design process, a global co-design process. They proposed a kind of global PD hub. We launched that. And then as we were launching that, we heard that there was a broader need in the participatory democracy community for more coordination. And so that led to our organization. We ended up bringing together 58 participatory democracy leaders from around the world and asking what was working in this field, what wasn't working, what would take their work and our work together to the next level. And they decided our name, our mission, our vision, values, programs, everything that we do. So we're an articulation of what this field hopefully needs to move forward. Our mission is to expand people's power to make government decisions. And we do that by supporting organizations and governments around the world that are building participatory democracy. What that looks like, and I'll share some examples that can hopefully be useful for you if you want to dive deeper into this work. We try and share resources, build power, and change policies. So sharing resources, one thing that we heard a lot from people in this field is that there's a ton of information out there on participatory democracy, but it's still hard to find information that's relevant for you in your language for your context. So one of the first initiatives that we did was to create an online resource center, not with everything out there, but more of the recommendations, vetting materials by language, by region, by topic, and you're all welcome to use this. It compiles a lot of the best videos, guides, materials, trying to make this more accessible for people in government and organizations on the ground. Another thing that we heard that's a challenge in this field, I'm hearing also in this community, is that this work can be very isolating. A lot of people feel that they're doing this on their own in their community. And often they just want to talk with someone else who's done it before and can help them figure out their stupid questions and navigate this work. So people proposed a mentorship program, which we launched last year, where we connect people who are starting or growing participatory democracy programs with people who have been leading them for years. You're all welcome to use this as well. It's free. So if you want to connect with someone who's led one of these programs elsewhere, you're welcome to do that with a few funders actually that are engaged in the program now. And lastly, we ultimately want to change policies and change the policies of international organizations, of funders, of researchers, so that they support people doing this work on the ground. One thing that we heard is that a lot of researchers are not focused on practitioner needs. And so with support from the Hewlett Foundation, we created a global research board and then a research agenda to try and shift the research on participatory budgeting towards what people on the ground need. And lastly, we try and put this into practice, and I'll talk about this more later with our own funding process, but we also try to run a people-powered organization. So we are a membership-based organization with over 45 member organizations around the world who are supporting and building participatory democracy in their countries and regions. These are groups also that could work with you if you want a local partner for any of this work. And we function as a kind of union for these organizations, providing services, advocating for their shared interests, and deciding how to spend money together, which we'll talk about later. So as context to all that, now I want to shift into PB, participatory budgeting, which is a process in which community members directly decide how to spend part of a public budget. So it's giving people real power over real money. This sounds straightforward, but it's a complicated process in some respects. Generally, the way it works is that you have a a participatory design process to shape the process that's led by the community. You then invite people in the community to brainstorm and propose ideas for how they would like to see a budget spent. They then develop proposals, concrete, feasible proposals for spending the funds. There is then a public and community vote, and the projects that get the most support in the vote win funding, and then the cycle repeats each year. To give you a sense of what this looks like, I'm going to try to show a video, which is an introductory video. Apologies if you've seen this before. If you have, you're welcome to rehearse the lines. I hear that they're looking for a new narrator to replace me, which I'm really excited about because I'm not a good narrator. So maybe you could play that role. So this is an introductory video focused mostly on the US, but to give you a sense of what this looks like in practice.
I haven't got any sound, Josh.
Oops.
We tested it and everything.
You know what? I know what to do. Sorry about that, folks.
It's not a good Zoom call unless something goes wrong.
Yeah, we're just keeping it interesting for you all. Let's see, video settings.
I like the two images of Josh side by side.
Sorry about that.
At least you're wearing different shirts.
Audio. Yeah. Yeah, let me actually unshare and then share again in 1 second. Stop share. Oh, there it is. Great. Yes, I am wearing different shirts. I have at least 2 shirts. It's true. Let's see. All right. Take 2. Please give a thumbs up, someone, if you can hear.
Where's the sound?
Right, if you live in this community and you pay taxes, come out and vote, decide how your tax dollars get spent.
Participatory budgeting gives people real power over real money to make decisions that affect their lives. It's a democratic process in which ordinary community members directly decide how to spend part of the public budget.
Oh, this is different because you're actually voting for where the money is going to.
My bad. Take 3.
Right, if you live in this community and you pay taxes, come out and vote, decide how your tax dollars get spent.
Participatory budgeting gives people real power over real money to make the decisions that affect their lives. It's a democratic process in which ordinary community members directly decide how to spend part of the public budget.
Oh, this is different because you're actually voting for where the money is going to be spent instead of allowing them to decide where to spend the money.
Who knows better about their community than the people that live in their community?
Not be afraid of the big words, participatory budgeting. It sounds boring, but it's the opposite of that.
So how does it work? First, people brainstorm ideas. They come together in meetings and assemblies and start to think of what kinds of projects they would like to see in their neighborhood.
We had to think big. We have $1 million that we could use, so we can fund parks, health issues, streets.
Volunteers work with experts to turn people's initial ideas into full project proposals.
We started with maybe about 40 projects, and so we had a series of budget delegate meetings, and we narrowed down the list into about 4 or 5 projects
We met with the Parks Department and we talked about what we wanted to see change in some of the parks and how we were going to work with them.
What are the real needs of the community? If you only have a certain amount of money, what is it that you can do that's going to benefit as many people as possible?
I'm dreaming of new benches, modern benches. Seniors have nowhere to go.
Displays at bus shelters throughout the district, and it will tell people when the next bus is due to arrive.
We're asking for a projector and 30 Mac laptops.
State-of-the-art teen fitness center.
To put solar panels on a firehouse.
After volunteers share the top projects, the community gets ready to vote.
It's a way of validating every voice in our community and saying, you know what, whatever your position is, you live in our community, you have a right to decide, and that me as a representative and government should respond and should listen to that voice. Anybody could vote in this process, immigrants, whether you're documented or not, young people that normally don't get to vote.
Most people, they don't even know that 16-year-olds can come out here and vote today. Some of them are really surprised. They said, really? I said, yeah. They have a voice.
The projects with the most votes get funded.
The Red Hook Library Community Garden, right here.
The projects are then implemented over the next few years. And the following year, the process starts again. People brainstorm new ideas, turn them into new projects, vote on them, and fund more improvements for their community. PB becomes part of the budget process. It becomes a new way of governing.
I think this is like the greatest wave of democracy coming into the United States. It started with Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989.
From there, it spread all over Latin America to over 1,500 cities around the world. In Toronto, public housing tenants have decided how to spend millions of dollars on improvements to their buildings. City council members in Chicago, New York, and other cities have engaged thousands of residents in allocating discretionary funds. Entire cities have launched PB, such as in Vallejo, California, for funds from a sales tax, and in Boston for youth funds. Even schools and universities have used PB.
This was a great opportunity for you to be a part of government and better the city you live in. Who wouldn't want to take advantage of that?
You're creating a more educated platform of voters overall. So I think this can only be good for the big project of democracy.
I will not show that again. Once is enough. So thank you all for going through the technical difficulties with that. Hopefully it was useful for you. Some quick updates. So that was made in 2014, I believe. Since then, participatory budgeting has expanded and spread much more widely. So there's at least 7,000 processes around the world, more depending how you count them. And in all kinds of budgets. So whether it's schools, school districts, universities, public agencies, housing authorities, city districts, cities or towns, counties, states or provinces, and even at the national level, there's several countries that are now doing participatory budgeting nationally. Some of the best models out there, Paris has committed around 500 million euros already through PB and just launched a even bigger process now under COVID, which is really impressive. As I mentioned, a lot of agencies like in Toronto Community Housing, where I first learned about PB. Youth processes, schools. This is my obligatory picture of my son here on the left, Mira. This is his proposal on participatory budgeting at his school, which got funded for more toys for recess. It's an excellent idea. And then parents at the school voting alongside the students. So you can also do this in your kid's school if you have children. And a lot of this work has gone online recently, especially during COVID. And so processes like in Argentina, National University of Rosario, they transitioned their process from in-person to entirely online during COVID. It was very successful. So I want to share a few lessons from the practice of participatory budgeting for participatory grant making. I also recently published an article on Nonprofit Quarterly, which has more detail on this if you're interested. So a few of the things that I've learned doing this work, one is the need to share power and support. So this isn't about just letting go of power, but also about supporting community members. So if you share power, people will step up. If you don't also share support, they will fall down. So this means providing things like interpretation, childcare, transportation, facilitators, support with research and data. So this is a very collaborative process. Second is to combine technical and community expertise. So one of the main reasons that PB works is because it combines people's lived community expertise and the very valid and important technical expertise of people in government. Everything that goes on the ballot has to be vetted and approved by agencies to make sure that it can actually be done. And it wouldn't be respectful not to do that. So this is a really important role for technical experts, whether they're in government or at foundations, is to let people know what's feasible, what's doable, how much do things really cost. A third main lesson is to institutionalize participation. So PB is generally not a one-off process, but it becomes part of the budget cycle. It becomes just the way money is allocated. And there's a lot of push in the UK now, I know, for mainstreaming this practice into mainstream budgets and to have it be more a part of the budget process overall, likewise for grant makers. And finally, to meet people where they are. So the best process is they don't ask people to come to government, but they go to people. So they have sessions in schools during lunch hours, at places of worship, outside of grocery stores. So really going to where people are and not just asking them to participate in your process, but bringing this to the community. So I want to close with a few kind of key questions for participatory grant making and tensions and challenges from this work they also see in participatory grant making. And then we'll come back to these at the end for the small group discussions. So these are a bit of previews of those questions. The first one that comes up a lot in PB is what counts as PB? So what is PB and what is another kind of participation? A great example of relevance here is ketchup. So who here likes ketchup? Can you just raise your hand if you like ketchup? Any ketchup likers? Who here thinks ketchup is a vegetable? Could you raise your hand? So this is not an abstract question. This is actually a political question that our former president, Ronald Reagan, put to the forefront when he cut school funding, and his administration argued that ketchup is a vegetable. It counts as vegetables for school lunches because it is red and it comes from tomatoes. So deciding what counts as something matters a lot and determines the quality standards. And we see this a lot in PB, where there's a lot of questioning of what counts as PB. If it's just consultation and there's no decision-making power, should we be calling it PB? This is an old French student poster that I love. I participate, you participate, he participates, we participate, you all participate, they profit. So people aren't stupid. They recognize that you can have lots of participation, but if power isn't shared, that it's not real. In participatory budgeting, there's a parallel work around budget consultations that is ongoing. And so we've really been pushing to call consultation a consultation and call PB, PB. A consultation, you share feedback and ideas. That is one small part of the process. Participatory budgeting, you actually brainstorm ideas, develop proposals, cast a vote. There's real decision-making power. And I feel like participatory grant making has not been as clear about this, deciding on what counts as participatory grant making. And the spectrum has been very broad, and that can be dangerous. In our case for participatory budgeting, it's good for people in power to have a broad definition where anything goes. It's actually bad for our health, like counting ketchup as a vegetable. Saying any kind of consultation is good can really lower the bar and be tokenistic at times. The second big question for both fields I've seen is what impact should we measure? And for this, I actually want to look at the example of bike lanes. Another question for you all, who here thinks that more bike lanes are better? You could raise your hand or give a thumbs up. Are more bike lanes better? So I see some support for this. So you probably would like this bike lane. Or this one. Or this is my favorite. You can actually fly over the railing if you have some good elevation. So maybe more bike lanes aren't better. And maybe actually fewer traffic deaths are what counts. And so we've seen a parallel movement called Vision Zero to refocus what we measure and what impacts around traffic deaths. And we've seen this for participatory budgeting. where there's questions about what to measure that I think apply to participatory grant making as well. So is it the number of processes? Do we just want more participatory grant making processes? Is it the amount of people who are participating? The amount of money that's allocated? The amount allocated per resident or per community member? Is it who participates? Or the impacts on broader spending and policies outside of the process? So these are very live questions. And the last question I wanted to raise is who decides what? And in particular, a few key things for participatory grant making challenges, I suppose, to put forward, is that the public gets a vote. Generally in participatory grant making, participation is limited to a panel or a small group of people. In PB, there is a public vote. So it's not just a small group, but it's anyone in the community. So do participatory grant makers want to also open up decision-making to have part of the process be by public vote? And do communities decide funding areas? Like what's actually being considered? This is from the new PB process in Seattle, where they had a Black-led community research process that identified what the funding areas are for the city's new $30 million PB process. And so they're, before even the call for participation, they're deciding what people can consider. And just lastly, if you want to learn more, we have resources on our website of online courses and training, mentorship. And there's been some discussion on the side among several people in the group on having more of a collaboration on community-led funds. Maybe Kelly wants to speak about that later as well. So we're working on that, and would love to have other folks who are interested in exploring community-led, democratically managed funds, how we can build those up more. So I will pause now for some questions about PB. If we'll have questions of clarification and kind of facilitating this.
I don't know if anybody has anything. Josh, there's one already that's gone into the chat from Pam. Pam, I'm happy to read that out for you, but also if you want to ask it, feel free.
Yeah, I will do if you don't mind, because my question that I put on the chat was about whether you do help to work with organisations and groups to cost up and plan their proposal. This is my first time here, but it's really great to hear from what you're doing. And we've been doing this here for a little while, and we find a lot of the most marginalised groups who have some great ideas, can't actually necessarily have the skill set or the time or energy to cost things up. So I was just interested in the work you might have done to help them plan.
Sure. Yeah. So one thing to clarify, this work is not work that I do or even my organization or organizations have done. It's run by government in general. So this is people in government, whether that's city government, county, schools that are doing the work. But the answer is yes, but that's one of the main roles of that technical expertise, is to actually give quotes for how much projects cost. So before anything goes in the ballot, it has to be given a price tag by government. Otherwise, it can't be done. And this is one of the biggest reasons, again, why PB works, but also the biggest part of the education process. The people often have no idea how much things cost or what's feasible. We get lots of proposals for, building a swimming pool on top of a school roof, which is often impossible, but even if it were possible, it costs millions of dollars. And so this is a big learning opportunity for people when they get to interact with technical experts, with representatives from different agencies, and learn how much things cost, what's already being done. And we hear a lot from people like that. That's where they have the biggest aha moments. Like they had no idea what government did and how much things cost. And part of this is about helping people value government and value public goods and recognize the work and the resources that make them possible.
My university built a swimming pool on the top of the university building, but hadn't factored in the weight of the water. So it never got filled with water because the building would have collapsed. So there you go, there's my fun fact. Jerry, you've got your hand up. You might have your hand up, yeah?
Yeah, no, it was related to the question or the comment you just made, Josh, because I was just thinking about in terms of like who does the assistance around how much things cost, that even that could be potentially inherently like political. I guess in my experience, I've definitely seen folks who don't want to do something say that there's an exorbitant cost attached, and then folks will bring other experts in to say. So I'm wondering how does the process account for that potentially happening?
Yeah, and I'll add too, there's some folks with excellent PB experience. I see David Riley here on the call, so feel free to add in the chat as well if other people want to add to these answers. But yeah, that is a political process, deciding kind of which people at the agencies actually do that support. And I've seen people do that really well and really poorly. I've seen people do it very defensively, and some people that really embraced the role. And it was the first time that they engaged with the community where they weren't the enemy, where it was a positive discussion about what we can do, whereas most of their discussions have been about reactions or no's to things that were being proposed. So it can open up a lot of space, and a lot of the work is about shifting government and shifting government attitudes and practices and building up capacities for engagement. But also having community accountability for that and like opening up new questions. And so that's one of the biggest outcomes I see from a lot of these processes is new questions, challenging things that people didn't even know to challenge before. Like, why is it that procurement costs that much? Why is it that we can't invest in local businesses or have them do the projects? And those are productive questions that don't get asked if people don't know how the process works. So it's definitely not easy, but it does often raise productive, challenging questions.
Diana's made the comment in the chat that the cost question is the one that comes up a lot during participatory grant making, particularly from traditional funders who are trying to pivot into that participatory space. It's often one of those things that you're never quite sure is a blocker because it's a blocker, or it's a blocker because somebody doesn't want to do it. And unpicking that is always a bit of a challenge. We've got some other comments and questions in the chat. Krust has asked something, but it shoehorns very nicely into the next session where Rose comes in. So I'm not ignoring that. I'm coming back to it. There was another, there's loads of you now. Nikki, do you want to ask yours?
Okay, so I just wondered whether there's usually a funding range per project, or otherwise, how do you manage, if you've got a budget of £30,000 or whatever, how you kind of split that between the number of projects that people vote for?
Yeah, so there are always criteria established for what's eligible. Some of those are fixed legal criteria around, say, capital funding or infrastructure funding or program funding, that money just can or can't go to certain things. And some of them are kind of policy choices of the program as far as how big a project can be, what the maximum price tag is for a project, or where it is, or the theme. So yeah, some of that is set in advance, some of it is set during the planning process, and that's something where the best processes have the community actually make those decisions about what the criteria are. And that's a really productive discussion, like what should be eligible. Do we want there to be a lot of smaller projects or bigger projects? Do we want it to be targeted or supporting particular communities or issues or not? So yes, there is a funding range. There has to be for it to get done, because you can't have something that's exceeding the available funds. The other thing, maybe touching on Diana's question, which is really important around the cost of this, because that definitely is something that we hear a lot, that this is expensive work. Two things that I've found helpful. One is breaking it down to cost per person. And so we've calculated that it's on average around $1 per person, per resident, to do participatory budgeting. It can be a bit more if it's at like a smaller scale, a bit less if it's at a large scale. But when you talk about it that way, it's not asking a lot, like $1 per person to engage people in democracy. If you're talking about the whole community, again, where everyone's participating. And the other thing is that the cost savings, that we hear this a lot, that it prevents wasteful projects that either cost too much because they haven't been vetted enough by the community, or actually don't respond to community needs, and there's later pushback on them or not use of them. And so it ensures that money is spent wisely and not wasted. We still hear the question, but those are some of the better responses I've heard. I'm
going to bring in Krista now to ask the question that you've put in the chat, and then I think 'cause that will open it up to bringing Rose in. If you're happy to, you don't have to speak. I can say it for you. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. And well, my question was about the spectrum. You mentioned, Josh, the spectrum of participatory grant making. And my question, I'm a government grant maker, and my question is, do you consider participatory budgeting to be part of that participatory grant making spectrum, or something separate to it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, personally, I think most people focus PB on government funds and see it as connected to government. And so there has to be some public money, or that can look very different in different places, what that means. But it's not just private funds. So in your case, I mean, you could do participatory budgeting if you're a government program. The biggest thing I would say is having that public vote, where there is a public decision-making process and not just a consultation. That's the main criteria. But people are applying this in other settings. There's some folks that are doing this in corporations. And I mean, there's no one person who can say this is or is not PB. I think if it's democratizing spending, then that's a positive for me. And maybe, yeah, we can transition into the next part now, where we talk about applying this to participatory grant making. And can share a few examples, both of which are under what I think some of us are starting to think of as democratically managed, community-led pooled funds. So pooling funds, especially from multiple grant makers, to resource a particular community, whether that's geographic or community of practice, and actually have that community manage those funds rather than having a funder manage them and having it be led by the community. So I'll briefly share one quick example that we are doing, and Rose will talk more about a better, more ambitious example of fund action. At People Powered, we are putting this into practice as well. So we have our own democratically managed pooled fund for our membership of organizations around the world that are working on participatory democracy. So it's pooling resources from a few funders, and it's managed by our member organizations, the Should Before and boards. And so it looks like the PB process, even though we are not a government entity. So we have a planning committee that plans it, collect ideas. We've done that all online, especially this past year, develop proposals, and then people actually vote, the members in this community vote. And then we funded the top projects. We are managing the projects, so we're kind of serving as government, in some cases contracting them out, and in other cases we are doing them directly. And that's one of the interesting questions to think about, is who does the work and who can most effectively implement the projects. So far we've allocated $155,000 to 9 projects, just the first couple funding cycles. You can see more information on the link here. A lot of these things are kind of resources or events or the mentorship program that I mentioned before. We're still looking to build out this program and learn a lot from other people, so it's pretty early stages. I will pass it off to Rose now, who can talk about a program that is more advanced of fund action.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm going to talk about fund action, but listening to Josh speak, one of the things that I wanted to highlight was his point about, is it participatory budgeting or is it a consultation? And this is one of the things about participatory grant making. And the way Josh put it was, it's not unless power is shared. And I would say that with participatory grant making, that is very similar, but the word power, you know, what does that mean? And I think it's about who decides on the agenda and the values. And this is something we've talked a lot about in the community. And this is where I think that whenever I've been asked about designing a participatory grant process, because I've done several, I always start with asking, what are the sort of parameters and boundaries that you are setting in the first instance? Because if they're quite tight, if it's okay, there's this much money and they have to be in grants of this size in this country, etc., then that's at one end, which is borderline consultation end, whereas fund action was wide open in many ways. The boundaries, that was really broad. The values, the strategy, the vision, the staffing, the operation, everything was set by the community members. And so I think when we have this question about what is participatory budgeting, we also have this conversation about what is participatory grant making. And I want us to bear that in mind while and I can present Fund Action now. So the background of Fund Action is that it was designed using democratic principles, and in many ways it grew out of the sort of participatory and deliberative democracy movement that the participatory budgeting is part of. And many of the people that were directly involved in Fund Action were also involved in participatory budgeting and similar activists movements in their own communities. And oh yeah, I should explain as well. I work for OCFE, which is the European grant-making arm of the Open Society Foundations. But before I joined OCFE, I helped to set up Fund Action. And it makes sense for OCFE to be funding Fund Action, because OCFE is a funder, because OCFE works on democratic innovation and participatory budgeting being one of them. And so when Fund Action was set up, it was seen as an experiment to build a community of activists, very loosely defined across Europe, again, very loosely defined, working on systemic change, loosely defined. And the participants in this case, as we've heard, often participants are community members of a specific geography or region, or combined around an identity issue, perhaps, or a community of practice. Here, it was sort of very broad. It's activists working on sort of progressive things in Europe. And at the moment, it's invite only. So it's a closed community, but I think there have been experiments and intentions to grow this. At the moment, they use Decidim, which is an online open source platform that was developed originally for things like participatory budgeting and participatory policy making by the city of Barcelona. So they use that for decision making there. And Decidim has been adapted so that all processes that Fund Action do can now be done online, although they do meet occasionally, and here's a picture of a meeting. But one thing I want to emphasize is that all decisions from staffing, budgeting, strategy, not just grant making decisions, are made by the community. So if we skip to the next slide, there are 3 different types of grants at Fund Action. There were resist grants, we think grants, and we knew grants. And these are designed by a process designed working group who then post these sort of options online, and then community members can vote on how the process should look. And when new grants are the largest of the grants. And this is the process here. So it's a bit similar to the cycle that Josh shared earlier. There were proposals, so members upload proposals onto the Decidim platform. And then there's a deliberation phase where all members and donors can comment, ask questions, like give endorsements, and there's responses and there's discussions. Sometimes folks decide to combine proposals or collaborate. And then after this phase, there's a voting phase where all members get 5 votes or however many, and they vote on the proposals that they think should be shortlisted. This is then allows us to have a sort of shortlisted group, which is then given to a peer-to-peer panel. So this is this peer review panel is made up of randomly selected members using a process called sortition, which is where you choose by lottery, but also using a stratified sampling so that you can make sure that you have diverse genders, diverse geography, etc., represented in the peer-to-peer panel, which is about 5 or 6 people. They then come together, look at the shortlist, do some deliberations, do some interviews, do some more discussions, and then they deliberate and decide on the final funded groups. So the original proposals, there might be about 30. After the voting phase, they will be cut down to a shortlist of maybe 10. And then the deliberation phase with the peer-to-peer panel decides on the final 4 or 5 funded groups. I can go into much more detail on this, and there's also others involved in Fund Action that are on the call as well, but I'll pause there and we'll get into the discussion. Thanks.
Perfect. Josh, do you have anything else that you wanted to add in?
No, so I think we just wanted to bring back up those discussion questions that I mentioned before, which is not a full list, so you feel free to discuss other things, but these are some of the questions that we suggested could be useful for the breakout groups to talk about. So what counts as participatory grant making in light of this work on PB? What impact should we measure? Who decides what? And how much decision-making power is shared over what decisions? So as starting points for the discussions.
Perfect. Thank you. We are going to do this in a way that hopefully gives you an opportunity to meet some people and also have a conversation. So we're going to split up back into breakout rooms. I have put those questions in the chat, so hopefully you can access them. Feel free for the discussion to flow though. If there's other stuff that has piqued your interest or you're interested in kind of chatting through with your group, please do. We're going to put you in breakout rooms for about 20 minutes and then come back together and kind of we'll give some kind of key thoughts or opinions that have come out of that. Any questions, let me know, but otherwise I will sort these out. Okay. That should have set you off. No, it hasn't. Has it worked? Have you got that? No? Excellent job. Well done. I'm on it. I am on it. Okay. Right. That should have come up. Yes? Woohoo! Enjoy. Hello, everybody. How was that?
Who's outside in the garden? It looks beautiful.
I know. I'm jealous.
In the sun.
That's what I thought too. Are they in California or something? Who's
That's not
Lisa
fair.
Hauser? I recognise that sunshine. Is that Californian sunshine?
It is.
Damn.
It's temporary. We'll have rain next week.
I'll send you my snow if you want.
One day a year, sure.
How was that for everybody?
Wonderful.
Good. Anybody got any particular burning things that they would like to share with the group? Any particular hot topics?
I just want to say sorry to Kelly and Nikki very quickly, just because towards the end I couldn't unmute myself and I thought I'd gone quiet. One thing that we talked about a little bit was lived experience. So I was going to share the report that that Baljit produced, which is yeah, I'll put that in the chat now.
Thanks, Asha. For those of you who don't know Baljit, she's a wonderful woman in the UK, and actually she works a bit in the US as well, doing work around knowledge equity and where we value knowledge coming from, and is that just an academic and work experience, or is that from kind of our lived experiences as well? Pam, was that you waving a hand because you wanted to talk? Or you...
we had an interesting conversation about how you make sure marginalised voices and marginalised issues are reflected in PB, because it's often easier for community to support pleasant, easier projects than that, and that how you needed to make sure you were factoring public good into that a bit. We didn't necessarily have an answer, but we explored it as a topic, I think.
Brilliant, thanks. Any more for any more? Go on, Kelly. Can just see these little hands coming up in various places. So
hi everyone, sorry it's kind of loud here. Yeah, just wanted to share that Josh and I have been talking about some sort of community discussion around deepening the community-led fund work, from not just grant making but also investing, and sort of supporting communities to be making all of the decisions about funds. So if anyone's interested, if anyone is a practitioner, please reach out to me. I'd love to chat.
Kelly, you've also very helpfully mentioned in the chat, some of you may or may not know, we have a Slack community that is lovely and very active, and a fabulous place to continue conversations, ask questions, get involved. I know that Slack isn't everybody's cup of tea. I have only just discovered it, but I'm loving it. So if this is you and you're a bit nervous, let us know, because we can get somebody to give you a bit of a demo about how it works. But there is a channel within the Slack called Monthly Meetings. So if you've got a question or a conversation that you'd like to continue that you've started today, feel free to carry on that in the Slack community. And if you aren't in Slack, I'll put my email in the chat and you can give me a shout and I will get you added in. Or actually you can probably email Natasha directly, because she is the Slack whiz kid on that. Any other comments or questions from anyone?
I'll just add briefly to what Kelly was saying and emphasize that I think a lot of us we're really learning as we go with this, with fund action and with our work at People Powered. And so I'm hopeful that we can have a more focused kind of network building effort to learn like what are useful tools for this work, what are good practices. And so that's something we're building out with Kelly, and would love other folks who are interested in like practically building out these models for how you can have democratically managed community-led pooled funds. I hope it can be a concrete next step from this. And I don't know if some other folks who are involved in PB also wanted to say hi, just so people know there are other resources for this or not.
Thanks, Josh. Rose, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to say that in our group, we had a really interesting discussion about the sort of rationale behind doing this and the sort of drive to push for saying how much more effective it is and to measure the impact and sort of be able to say this is, you know, a strategic investment or whatever, but then also not overlooking the fact that it's more just and that this is about human rights, as someone put it, you know, this is, and I think this is more perhaps present in the participatory budgeting, because obviously this is usually tax resources, right? So it's people actually spending money that they are contributing to. But I think one of the things that we forget is that most philanthropy is tax subsidized. And so in fact, when philanthropists are giving away their money, they're giving away our money too, because 25% of what they're giving away we've paid for. So for me, the sort of justice element is there as well.
Thanks. There was a lot of nodding to that one. Anybody else? Any more for any more? I can only see the people on my screen, so if you're kind of frantically waving your hand in a different space, I can't see you at this point. So feel free to unmute and just go for it. No? Brill. Well, that concludes our Thursday Club. Thank you so much for coming along. Some of you may have found this through an Eventbrite link rather than the community of practice. If you are that way inclined and you would like to join the community of practice and get involved in our monthly sessions, I'll put my email address in the chat and we can add you in. We host these sessions each month, as I explained at the beginning, of Thursday evening for the UK time. My time math is dreadful. And Friday mornings for the UK time. I don't know what time that is with you guys, but those sessions are both open for you to get involved with. They're the same agendas. Let us know. There's an emailing list, there's a Slack group, I've got some secret news for you. I don't know whether I should share it, but we are in the process of developing a website which will have some resources, so that's very exciting. And we'll also reduce poor Kelly and Natasha. I don't know if Natasha's on the call. These two do a sterling job, and you may have noticed as you get added into the community, one of them adds you to the Slack, one of them adds you to the email list. I send you some information. It is a very, very wonderfully messy volunteer space, but we're hoping the website might reduce the inbox overload, as all three of us have to try and add you into different parts of the community. Another plug for Ben, I was going to say Beg, Ben and Meg's new book, Letting Go. They've added the link for where you can buy that in the chat, and there is, I believe, a discount if you use PGM in caps as the code, and lots of different sessions coming up. Give us a shout if you missed anything, if you want to catch up. I'll stop talking and you can all go and enjoy your evenings and days. It's nearly Friday, yay. Bye everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.